This episode of the Fiction Writers Podcast is brought to you by How to Write a Novel That Sells. Do you dream of writing a best-selling fiction novel? With the right tools, you could get there sooner than you think. Visit www.howtowriteanovelthatsells.com and unlock the secrets to writing compelling fiction taught by international best-selling author Lana Mcara. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana Mcara, where you will discover tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Here you'll find new energy, new perspectives, new resources, and new ideas that will spark your creativity into a blaze of brilliance. It's easier than you think. Be sure you visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, get out your notebook, tune in, and let's get started.
How does a ghostwriter ghostwrite fiction? This is a question that comes to me quite often because I am a ghostwriter as well as an author. And that's what we're going to talk about today. My name is Lana Mcara. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast. Tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. I'm delighted today to welcome to our podcast, Autumn Karen. Autumn is a filmmaker, a journalist, a ghostwriter, an educator who uses writing to elevate traditionally unheard stories. She's English faculty at High Point University, an honors fellow at UNC Greensboro, and a longtime contributor to local independent paper Triad City Beat. Her award-winning work as a journalist, author, and screenwriter centers on themes such as systematic oppression, grief, and complex societal relationships. Among her credited co-authored books in her last decade as a ghostwriter are Mississippi Still Burning, From Hoods to Suits, the story of a Black preacher who took over the KKK from prison. Autumn, I've got to get that book. Amazing. Also, Amy, Book One, an empowerment erotica novel published through the University of Pleasure. Her award-winning short screenplay, Infinity Care, is based on her own experience losing a daughter to epilepsy. She's the founder of Medusa's Gaze, a development and distribution company that focuses on amplifying the voices of women and gender-diverse creators. So today we're going to talk about the secrets of being a ghostwriter and how real-life stories can support conflict in compelling fiction. Welcome, Autumn.
Thank you so much, Lana. It's great to be here.
Oh, I was excited when I found out you're a ghostwriter. We haven't had a ghostwriter on the podcast yet, and it's something that comes up. And before we dive into your questions, have you had any feedback from people that says, how could you ghostwrite for someone? That's kind of cheating for a person to ghostwrite fiction. Does that ever come up?
That does come up. And, we really... I dive into the ethics of ghostwriting heavily in the courses that I teach on ghostwriting at UNCG and now at High Point University, because it really is about storytelling. And the way that I come at it from an ethical standpoint is that just like you would not expect yourself to go in and redo your bathroom, right? If you're like, hey, I want a new bathroom. It's kind of old. It's not really working. The pipes need work. You could go in there and do it yourself. You can go on YouTube and you could find out how to do it, and you could rip it all out, and it would take you a really long time, and the finished product would not be as polished as if you paid somebody to come in. Now, does that mean that your bathroom is not like your vision? Does that mean it's not what you wanted for your bathroom? Does that mean you're not the generative force of redoing your bathroom? Does it mean you don't own the bathroom? But the professionally done bathroom is going to look better and work better than the DIY bathroom. And so that's really what I see ghostwriting as, is it's much more, even in fiction, it's much more of a skills kind of trade thing. As much as I do believe in the artistry of it, I really see myself as a tradesperson when I work as a ghostwriter. And even in fiction, because somebody has a phenomenal fiction idea does not mean that they have the bandwidth or the skills or the time or the desire to write it. So that's my ethical take on it, is my plumber.
It's so interesting, Autumn, because I use that plumber connection, that analogy to describe that exact same thing. And we never talked about that. But yeah, you wouldn't go in there with your pipe wrench and all that stuff, and you have no clue what you're doing. And the same thing is true with writing. It doesn't matter if it's fiction or nonfiction. If you can get someone to help you and come out with a good polished product, why not? Why not?
No, I think that that's exactly what it is. I really enjoy the collaborative process. And, now moving into filmmaking, as I've done that, I mean, there's so many invisible creatives in the filmmaking process. I think this idea of kind of secret authorship is much more pervasive in culture than we think it is. So I don't think it's dishonest in books. I don't.
Oh yeah. And these big name people, we're talking about, big names that everybody in the world recognizes. They don't write their own books. They've got other things to do. They're traveling, they're speaking, they're having meetings. They don't have time for that. I had a client come to me with a beautiful story idea, and I said, "Why don't you write this yourself? I can just coach you and you can write it." And he said, "I run a law practice. I can't I can't do this and run my law practice." So yeah, there's a place for it. Absolutely. So, what are some of the common types of conflict you've seen in the stories that you've ghostwritten? And I'm talking about real conflict in real life that then translates into fiction.
Well, I'll say the biggest one is probably that Amy book one, the empowerment erotica novel. Although I can comment on some other fiction that I have ghostwritten and worked on. But the empowerment erotica novel was co-created with Jeremiah James, who was approached me with this story. And it is very much inspired by real life. So it's about this woman who becomes a secret swinger and goes behind her husband's back and gets into the swinging world, and then ends up eventually bringing him into it. And it's really based on a real person. That was the story that we wanted to tell. But obviously, given the sensitive nature of it, we wanted to fictionalize it and also to make it something more fun. And we actually have some interest from some studios, and I'm working on developing a pilot based on that. But very much fiction, in my experience, is grounded in real life. Like the best fiction is grounded in real experiences. And then you spin them and weave them into the author's vision. And that's how you come up with a really tight story. Because the bottom line is that real life, it does not have a neat story arc, right? I mean, we know that from ghostwriting, memoirs, and things. You're arguably not fictionalizing in ghostwriting and memoir writing, but you are definitely curating. And I think it's really similar in fiction, is that we're really curating to create a story based on our own experiences, however we might transform those.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of times people think that successful fiction authors, they have this brain that just pulls these ideas out of the air, and they sit at their computer and magic happens and it all, but actually we're collectors. We see ideas and we're like, "I'll take this one, I'll take that, take this other." And I love that word curators, because that's what we do. We curate.
No, it absolutely is. I always end up doing some kind of unit on Stephen King in my writing classes, just because he is so prolific and On Writing is such a great book. But one of my favorite things about Stephen King is how he uses his real life. So like Pet Sematary. And if you're familiar with Pet Sematary, it's about this family that loses their child and ends up burying their child in this pet cemetery that brings pets back to life. And then when the child comes back, the child is like a demon. And that was born out of Stephen King moved to like a busy road, and he had a little kid, and his little kid like went for the road, didn't get into the road, like didn't actually get into the street, but like they grabbed the kid, just like yanked the kid out back from the road. And Stephen King was like, "Oh, hey, there's a pet cemetery that I saw in town. What if what if my child had died?" And then he infused all of that kind of projected grief into that story. And then you get this like legendary thing that's been adapted so many times, touches so many people's lives because it was grounded in his real experience.
Wow, that is so interesting. That was a pretty big stretch to think about, the grabbing the child up and then the pet cemetery is somewhere over there, not right. I would have thought, for me, I would have had the cemetery right there and go, oh, my child was by the cemetery. I wonder how that would work. But Stephen King being who he is, right?
And he does that. I've got like a list of Stephen King things. A lot of his stuff is really based on his real life. And obviously is very much inspired by his actual childhood in Maine. So I think that the best fiction is done that way. And so that's why I do what I do.
Yes, yes. The marrying of those ideas and coming up with something unique and different. There's like a rush. It's an adrenaline rush to say, I've got one. We got one of those. Yeah, yeah. So when you're using real life situations, how does that affect your creative flow? Are you hindered by that, or how does that work?
For me, real life situations help me propel forward. So, for instance, Infinity Care, which is my screenplay. And so we're kind of getting, I think that all writing is very similar. Formats are different. I've written like blogs and speeches and audiobooks and written all kinds of things. But in screenwriting, Infinity Care is based on the loss of my daughter to epilepsy. And it really is just it's a 17-page animated script that walks you through her life as a disabled little girl and then her death. And then there's this science fiction kind of spin to it. And it was incredibly cathartic for me to write that screenplay. It is like she had 3 brothers. They're all baked into one person. My mom is there. The doctor, like, who treated her. You kind of get to merge characters. And I found it incredibly cathartic. That piece is actually inspired by her life, but the science fiction piece is based on a recurring dream that I had for many years after she passed away, of her kind of being resurrected in this like facility. And then I merged those two things to create a compelling arc, right? So that by the end of the screenplay, you feel connected enough when she passes and then when she's kind of resurrected that it actually makes sense to real life. And I will say that after having written it as a short story, which was the original iteration, I stopped having the dream just to get it out there. And then, I had some fairly intrusive PTSD symptoms for many years because she was a complicated little girl with we were airlifted a lot of times, and there was a lot of that. Having had public readings and shared this script, and it's done really well at festivals, and I've gotten to like hear actors read it and things. And then we're in the early stages of producing it. I've talked to several studios who are interested. And so that will happen down the line. It really helped with the PTSD because talking about and like hearing it explicitly, right? And in that instance, her death is very closely replayed. Like the actual scene of her in the ER and the doctors is a really tight replay of the ambulance and all that. But the rest of it is very fictionalized, just fairly fictionalized. So it's really cathartic. I actually just read it with my writing for the medical humanities students. I teach this pre-med, pre-health course for writing for like doctors and pharmacists. And so we read Infinity Care in it because then they get to actually talk to me in like a firsthand person's experience of medicalization. So I think that I've honestly forgot your question. I go down this road, but forgot your question. But there's such a payoff, I think, in fiction. It gives you an arm's length distance versus memoirs. And I'm on like book number 27. I mean, like it's obscene that they can be too close, right? They can be too real. And because they're so real, it can be difficult to connect. And not that I'm not here to write memoirs. And if anybody wants a memoir, I'm always here to talk to them. But I think fiction gives us a little bit more means to process it, both as a writer and as a consumer of the media.
Yes, you can go a little deeper in different, more creative ways with fiction rather than straight memoir to get your point across, whatever it is you're trying to portray. So what about the ethics of that? I mean, yes, with your own child and her death, I mean, that's your story. But when you're ghostwriting for someone else, how do you ethically use those real stories?
This is something that I have I encountered. We all have non-disclosure, so we can't talk we have to be cagey when we talk about it. But I had a client several years ago who had a really kind of violent story that was an essential piece of their evolution. And this involves somebody who was really close, and they actually they did not want to include into the book. They didn't want to include the person who had committed these crimes in the book. So we fictionalized the crime. We took the person out. We replaced the person with a stranger. And that kind of fictionalization, ethically to me, was important for their safety. So, whether we are exploiting someone's experiences, in a memoir setting, it's always a firsthand account. One of the things with my memoirs is that I do not do outside research. And when somebody hires me, I'm like, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to tell your story. I'm not going to interview other people. I'm not going to go look in archives. I want to hear your story from your perspective. I do look at folks. I've had clients give me their journals and things like that. But for me, ethically, I really think we need to be telling our own stories. So I think that I'm doing a good service to humanity in that sense.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And with memoir, there's kind of a point to the story, the selection. We have so much in our lives that we could tell, but we select a certain set time frame or whatever for a point. And I agree. We tell our own story. We don't need to tell someone else's story. How could we? Because one time I was thinking about doing a memoir. I'm still thinking about it. Haven't done it yet. And I was mentioning some incident to my sister, and she said, that's not the way it happened at all. It was this and that and the other. And that's when I realized we see the same incident in different perspectives. We were all there in the room, but one person picks up this, another person picks up that. And really, I think ethically, we need to tell our own story, not apologizing, but that's the way you saw it at the time. So that's a really good point, that we don't reach out and get other stuff. We tell our story. And really, isn't that the most powerful way to do it?
I think it is. I think it's the most powerful way to do it. It's really interesting as we start to talk about audience and connecting with audience. What is the point of writing a book? And that's I think that's the question, is the why. Why are we telling a story at all? And then why are we telling this story? And if the reason is to sell 1 million copies, that is probably not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. And I have various books, people who have higher profiles who I've written, and there are different agendas. The goal with some of the books that I've written has actually been to sell books. And if that's your bag, then we can write a book to that degree. But for the most part, people want to feel like they have control of the narrative. In my experience, that's why people write fiction books. It's why people write memoirs. And by the end of the memoir process, by the end of the autobiography process, however you decide to categorize it, depending on how much you include and all that stuff, people have a newly defined narrative of their own lives, which is why it is really helpful to work with another writer. It's also why in fiction work, I would say, and whether you're comfortable working with a ghostwriter or a coach or not, you definitely need to have eyes on it. You definitely need to be in a writing group. You definitely need to have some kind of accountability so that it's not just you, if you want it to be out there. Now, if you just want to write for yourself and keep it on your laptop, and that's great. But if you want it to connect with other people, you have to show it to other people. And that necessitates you getting feedback from other people who are going to tell you if it makes sense. Because if it makes sense to you, that doesn't always mean it's going to make sense to other folks, because you have a whole history inside your brain that they don't have.
Yes, absolutely. Editors are so important. And even though I've been editing for now 25 years, I still hire editors for me because I can't see the forest for the trees. We all need them. We need other fresh eyes. and beta readers and all of that to help us to see what is actually going on, not what's in here and not on the paper. That's one of my biggest things is where there's something missing here. I'm like, oh, it was in here, but it didn't get it on the paper.
Oh, it's so true. And it's like, the whole rule of three thing and making sure that when you bring up points that they are reiterated so the audience actually is able to retain them. And so I'll get into screenplays or books. I have a memoir that I'm in the final edit of right now and just had a beta reader get back with it. And they're like, hey, wait, there's this thing. When did that happen? Like I remember that it did happen, but like when in the story, I was like, oh, yes, I didn't actually give you like a time that this event happened. Okay. You need to know that it was in September or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And even smaller things like switching to a flashback or maybe jumping to someone else's perspective or like, what happened here? And you're like, oh, I didn't make it clear, to because we can't see what we can't see. We're in our own head, looking through our own eyes, and we need each other to help with that. So what have you got going on for the future? You're working on a screenplay. Is there anything else?
Oh, I have so many things. Oh, my plate. I have a couple of previous memoirs that I am in the process of optioning the film rights to. So one of those I am hoping to produce and shoot as a short myself next summer and just direct it myself and do the whole thing. The other one will be a much bigger, like international piece. If we get it off the ground, that'll be a global continent spanning film project, but a lot of interest in it, a lot of excitement about it. And I think that that'll get off the ground. I've got my MFA thesis. So I just finished my MFA in screenwriting.
Oh, wow.
And, my MFA thesis is called 1999. It is the story of these two best friends, very autobiographical, very much like a fictionalized version of my high school year in 1999 and my best friend, and kind of what happens when a friendship breaks as you go to college. So and then it's told through kind of the lens of the films of 1999. So that is a pretty big one. I'm set to lock that script next month. I got to finish another round of edits based on reader notes so that we can get a line producer and start fundraising for it. And then I have 2 books in process right now for clients. One that will be done in the next month and one that will be done by the end of the year. And I'm flirting with writing a book on ghostwriting. So with a publisher. So there's I've already got a lot done on that'll hopefully come out next year. I think I spring. So
Yeah, excellent. And one question that just came to me as you were going through that, converting a novel to a screenplay. Do you have any insights for us? Because I know so many novelists who know without a doubt, and it really is true, their book would make a great movie. What is involved in shifting from the book to the screenplay?
So the big thing is the shorthand, right? You have, and I mean, we know this, we all know this, that like they left so much out of the movie. You just do not have time. The pacing of a script is so fast. And honestly, I think that kind of pacing informs my own novel writing. Like even when I write memoirs, the pacing goes quicker because I'm a screenwriter. My biggest suggestion is to really, you make the cuts. So, or you just take a piece of it. So this one that I want to option as a feature film, I'm not interested in the whole book. And I've told the client that, like, I am not interested in your whole book. I am interested in this one summer. And that I think will make a compelling screenplay. And we'll dive into things that we didn't have room for in the book. And so I think that taking a slice of life out of a book is probably better than trying to do the whole thing. Because you're never going to get the whole thing. And then your audience is left feeling kind of empty, like, hey, what? But if you take a subplot or a storyline, if you can flesh out something in visual form that did not maybe work as well on the page, that is a much better idea than trying to go in the whole can. And that's a lot of experience from being a ghostwriter. I mean, you know this, that people want to put their whole life story in the book, and it's like, nobody wants to read that. And it's the same thing with a script. Nobody wants to see your whole book. You're transferring mediums. It just doesn't work. So that's my biggest advice, is you make the cuts. You know your story better. So if you're interested in a screenplay and you want to come up with a pitch for production companies, you need to be the one who has strategically said, this is what I want. This is what doesn't work.
What great advice. I've never heard anyone say that before, Autumn. That's awesome. Fabulous. Thank you. Yes, to realize that certain minor characters and situations, they have a lot of punch to them. And maybe you could do that. And it would also be lending some impetus for somebody to get the book then and see where that is in the book, because that would stimulate book sales as well. So, yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. It's, being on film sets is a different beast. I've had a couple of my pieces produced already, and then am producing several more and working on that. A film set is such a different thing than books, because in books we have space, and in a film set every minute is a dollar bill, and your budget is running out. I was at a film festival this weekend talking about independent producing, and every moment you were on set is you're eating into your post-production budget, you're eating into your marketing budget. There's just not time. But that's the great thing about books, is that we do have time, right? We can kind of simmer in things. So yeah.
Oh, great. Autumn, do you have something to give to our listeners today?
Yes. If you go onto my website, you can, and I actually don't remember exactly what I emailed you, but you can get a free 15-minute consultation with me. So if you go to autumncaron.com, there's a banner across the top. There's a Calendly link, and you can get 15 minutes for free with me, for your listeners. And we can talk about your idea, whether you are interested in developing your novel into a script or working on a memoir, whatever you are interested in, or just some coaching. I'm a full-time professor as well, and I love teaching, and I coach students, coaching a student through a novella right now. So I always have time for interesting stories, as packed as my schedule is.
That is great. And for everyone, the links are going to be in the show notes, wherever this may be. Our podcast is on Audible, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, you name it. We're there. We're out there on 20 different outlets. So look in the show notes and get the link and go on over there and check that out. Autumn, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Lana. It's great to talk to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And thank you for being with us today. I hope this was helpful. See you next time.
Thank you for tuning into the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana Mcara, where we share tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Remember to visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Fiction Writers Podcast.